Welcome to the Business Mechanics Show. I'm your host, Vaughn Sigmund, co-founder of Results-Driven Leadership. If you're looking for a way to take your career and business success up a notch, then look no further. We can provide advice and tips from experienced executives who have all seen it before. Our real executives aren't trained trainers. Understand that. Our training and coaching come directly from experience, not out of some training manual. Please explore rdltraining.com and power up your professional drive with valuable knowledge, skills, and tools to make it big. No matter if you're just getting started or you've been leading a company for decades. So let's get down to it. Let's get down to the nuts and bolts of making your career and business success huge. So speaking of real executives, let's start there. I'm really excited to do this today. Speaking of real executives, let me introduce you to the newest member of the results-driven team, Eric Van Doren. Let me say a few words about Eric first. Eric Van Doren is a seasoned regional sales manager with over 28 years of experience. So he's been around the block. He's done a few things. And he spent his career in the apparel and fashion industries. He had a couple other stories in there. He's very well-rounded. And so he brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise to his new role here with results-driven leadership. And so with his demonstrated history of success, Eric has a super strong background in sales, people, operations. He's very skilled in a variety of areas, including employee engagement strategy, creating great leaders, which is the most important part of it. Throughout Eric's career, as I know him, he's been very highly regarded, primarily in his ability to drive, result, and achieve goals. So a little bit more about his background. Prior to joining us here at Results Driven Leadership, he spent 28 years with PVH, or Phillips Van Heusen, which is a gigantic apparel company. And he was a regional sales manager there, where he was responsible for managing sales operations across a huge geographic area. And before that, Eric was part of his family's business, which you probably have heard. It's grown to a well-known international brand called Vans Shoes. You may know about that company. With his extensive experience in the industry and his unwavering commitment to success, Eric he's absolutely poised to make a significant impact in his new role here at Results Driven Leadership. Welcome aboard, Eric. I am so glad to have you on and to become a regular participant in the Business Mechanics Show.
Wow, that was impressive. Thanks, Vaughn. I really do appreciate it.
So, Eric, as you and I planned on this, and you and I actually spent about 3 minutes planning this, it was more than that, folks. We're going to be discussing courage in business leadership. He and I both started talking about this a couple of weeks ago. And we've been doing this series of podcasts and blogs and videos on what makes good leaders, what missing leaders have, how to spot leadership in your employees. And there's one, to me at least, I think Eric agrees with me, it's inarguable. I always struggle with that word. You can't argue this. The best leaders, there's one element of every great leader that they must have. It's the essential element, and that's being courageous. They may have other traits. They may have certain traits that make them highly effective. I think courageousness comes with confidence. And the more you do it, the more comfortable you get in your skin and your roles and responsibility. You can learn to be courageous. You can have a variety of other things, but you have to have courageousness. The topic Eric and I will be discussing today is courage in business leadership, because we both agree the best leaders are the ones who can inspire their employees to do better and better and be better, by the way. And a good leader, by the way, has to be a good manager, but not all managers are good leaders. And let's define that a little bit, Eric. And in your thoughts, your words, how do you make that distinction between a good leader and a good manager?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because you hear this a lot in the industry, and in the industry I've been involved, and everyone's searching for the leaders, which is hard to find, and I think there's something you can absolutely create and guide. I think a good manager really is really part of have different qualities, and they really have different responsibilities in each one of them. So really, typically, a good manager, get it down to the simple aspect of it, it's really about day-to-day operations. A manager can do the X's and O's and what's going to happen. The simple piece of talking to employees on a daily basis, following budgets, simple stuff that they have to do. And really that the performance standards are met on a timely manner. It's really what they're looking for. I think in the aspect of the difference between that and also a leader, I think they're really responsible. This is the fun stuff about it. It's really about inspiring. The reason why you go to work, to inspire the people, to motivate these folks that work with you or above you. You can inspire both ways, which I think is really the key thing for a great leader, is to inspire up as well as to the side or downward. So I think that's really important, and really to achieve a common goal with some joy with what you're doing. I think that is really important to do, in my opinion here. So good leaders really have strong abilities to communicate in nonverbal and verbal ways. They understand their surroundings. They, huge importance on relationship building. I think when you're relationship building about folks, I think you know what they want, they know what you want, and it allows you guys to go along the world, to collaborate, and to really grow your company, grow your development of your people, and create that magic culture that everyone's searching for. And I think that is always difficult to do, but I think it's something that's necessary to achieve your greater success. So really, in short of it, I think it's really about results and efficiency for the manager, a good manager. And also, I think there's really important piece for the leader is really people and vision. That's how I see it.
Yeah, I agree with all that. Well said. And to put a little finer point on it, or a key point to it, you almost have to wear two hats. Sometimes you got to wear the manager hat, but you also have to have available all the time the leader hat, right?
Right.
There's a lot of managers that don't have that leader hat, or it doesn't fit very well. And one other way to look at it is managers play a finite game and leaders play an infinite game. And let me explain that a little bit further, because when I heard this, I said, oh my God, that explains so many things. So a finite game in regards to business, I think that refers to a situation where there's very clearly defined rules, processes, policies, quotas, etc. You got a specific time frame, and you either win it or you lose it. You're winning every day or you're losing every day, or there's a blend of both. It's almost like a zero-sum game, meaning that, some days we're going to be winners, some days we're going to be losers. One person's success may be another person's loss. And a finite game that focuses on winning and achieving a specific outcome. And there's rules, there's policies, there are processes that are created to establish and create this clear outcome. How many products are we going to ship, or how much product are we going to sell, or how are we going to reduce? We're going to reduce turnover. That's the measurable part of it. And the loser sometimes could be your competition. For example, we may be looking to gain market share. There's winners and losers in all this. But on the other hand, an infinite game in business refers to the situations where there's no clear rules, there's really no time frames, and the only winner is everyone. Everybody wins. There's no clear winner, there's no clear loser. The focus on an infinite game is just, I want to make sure I can continue to play. I want to play forever. thus infinite, right? So the goal is keeping the game going. So that's playing the long game, the forever game. And as a leader, the key element to that is I want to maintain relationship. I want to build and maintain trust between all my players. And maybe the rules of the game aren't fixed. Maybe they can be changed over time. Maybe based on the situation, we have to make alterations to it. But all those changes, they're based on the situation and the players and their needs. And in a business context, a finite game is really seen as short-term and tactical, while an infinite game is long-term and strategic. And a finite game might be one that we're negotiating a sales contract or hiring or hitting quarterly profits, where an infinite game might be that the ongoing relationships between the company, its suppliers, its customers, its employees, are all building something really successful. I worked for a company whose motto, and we really lived it for as long as I was there. It may have changed since I left at CarMax, but we really live by the rule that take care of our employees, they'll take care of our customers, and everything else will take care of itself. And those are easy words to say. It's very difficult without proper leadership to live or run your company with that much empowerment and support of your employees. So both finite and infinite has a place in business, and good leaders or good managers have to be able to navigate both. But the key difference in these approaches are your mindset. Because with a finite game, we're focusing on winning short term, and an infinite, we're focusing on carrying on and playing forever. And getting back to this infinite game part, let me talk about courageous leadership and how all this works. You may or may not have a lot of intelligence or charisma, but you have to have courage to play an infinite game. And I'd say it again, an infinite leader is someone who has to have the quality of courage. So let me talk a little bit about courageous leadership as we start running into this. Hopefully that infinite and finite game made some sense. Did that make any sense at all, Eric?
It did.
I was rambling there a little bit. Let me take a minute and describe courageous leadership as I see it, as I look at myself as a leader, as I hold myself accountable as a leader, and as I have trained and developed tons of leaders who've worked with me and graduated higher levels of responsibility through the years. This courageous leadership it's a part of your leadership style. And to me, it's about bold decision-making, risk-taking, the willingness to stand up for your people, stand up for your ideas and thoughts, even when there may be some punitive measures involved, where there may be some adversity involved. Yeah, I think being courageous is around creating a culture of transparency, to make sure we're playing a continuous improvement game, or we're encouraging change. Because when we get stuck in things, we're going to end up slowing our growth and slowing our ability to adjust according to market and competition and that sort of thing. But a really, really good, courageous leader, they foster trust. They trust their people, which almost always evokes trust coming back at you. They get respected. They earn respect. Remember, respect doesn't come with a title. It comes with your behaviors and how you perform in the eyes of your people. And in turn, if you respect your people, they are likely to respect you back. If you in any way you treat them as your children or your pupils or anything like that, you're likely to hurt feelings and erode egos, and that becomes a tough road to come back from. And so with that, being courageous requires a level of emotional intelligence, or maybe even being self-aware, and for sure having a goal, a sense of purpose. What is my wrath of conviction? that I'm moving forward on? What do I really believe in? I used to work with a guy, was one of my regional vice presidents at CarMax, Ron Costa, who I love. Ron, he was one of the most courageous guys I knew. And he used to, he'd take his fist and say, we got to have a wrath of conviction. I just love that term, meaning we have to stand for what we're going to stand for. We're going to demand what we demand. We're going to have a standard, and we're not going to lower those standards. We're going to find a way to get everybody to that standard. So again, that leadership style is vital to any organization's success, in my humble opinion. Mostly, Eric talked about in leadership is, and we've said it several times now, is to inspire people, because when you're that committed, you're going to get inspiration. And we believe here at Results Driven Leadership that people, not everybody, but I believe most managers can develop courage. But it takes time, it takes effort, it takes confidence, it takes knowledge, it takes practice to be courageous. But most importantly, you got to be willing to take action. To take action. You can't cow to adversity or protect yourself. You got to protect your people first, regardless of how much fear you have inside you. You got to draw that out of you. And not that we're saving lives, but man, sometimes we're trying to protect ourselves, which in turn affects our people, sometimes negatively. You just got to be careful with that. I'll get off my box on that one, and let's talk about courageousness and leadership. And Eric, you and I have talked about this several times now. When you think about the signs, what are the indicators that a leader or a leadership team, a management team, let's not call them leaders, are lacking courageous leadership? What are some of your thoughts on the signs of a lack of courageous leadership in a manager?
Well, almost the opposite of stuff you just mentioned is really what's going to happen or not happen, right? I think really the piece is, it's really a lack of action. I think you mentioned that a few different times. It's time to make action or no action. No action, it's not going to be a good thing. You're going to have action. Then you see also the lack of that would be indecision. I think you mentioned it as well. Again, just the opposite of what you said. But indecision is, it's a spoiler for sure. I think it's something that elongates and people look at you funny and you're like, what's going on? And I can tell you thousands of stories, but I mean, really the story is you have to make a decision if matter what it is sometimes, right? And then I think there's a thing of which sometimes can get you through a lot of that, even if you are biding for time to make a decision or biding for time to start your action, is really the lack of confidence is a big issue. I think you can never, ever lose your confidence. It's so important, especially for courageous leadership. You have to have your confidence, no matter what, always. Now, we talked about clear communication. Obviously, if communication is not clear, I think that goes back to the indecision part of it. That's another piece of it. But the biggest missteps really of any type of manager who are not being courageous, I think, is not having able to have difficult conversations. I think there's a piece there that when you don't do that, everyone's watching. Everyone knows. They know the good people and the bad people. They see what's going on. If you don't do it, I promise you, it's so hard to come back from. So do it. Do it now. We have a little thing called kicking the can down the road, right? We'll have that conversation later. No problem. We'll get back to it. Nope. To use the word, nope. You cannot do that. You have to move forward on it. Get yourself together, have a decision, have a conversation with confidence. And that will cure almost all these pieces. Really, if you don't do that, there'll be a bevy of things that will follow. And I'm just going to list a few things in my head of the bevy of things that really are hard to come back from. So have that conversation quickly. It's really, as you mentioned, a decreased trust and respect as from all employees. When you avoid difficult conversations, people are going to go, he's not having the conversation. They're terrible.
What's he doing about it?
What's
Yeah.
he doing about it? And you're the leader. You got to be courageous. You got to stop that from happening. Unresolved conflicts, as you know, those things fester. Holy Lord, those fester for years sometimes. So you got to make sure you stomp it quickly and resolve those conflicts. You guys have to do that, or it'll
They don't
continue
fix
to escalate.
themselves. They don't fix themselves.
No, they don't.
Yeah.
They'll escalate and keep on going and
Yeah.
keep on going. And they go, gosh, have the conversation. Then there's a other piece about it is really a missed opportunity to have those folks as a growth and development of something. Super important. If you miss those opportunities, they might not be around. They might find another job. They might be
Yep.
one of your best employees. If you don't stomp out that employee that is not working correctly or correct that behavior, those really good ones are listening. And eventually,
Can we use a less violent word than stomp?
sure.
Like, go ahead. I think everybody will get that.
They'll get that.
Yeah, they'll get that.
So don't miss your opportunities, Vaughn. Right now, give me that conversation. I'm just kidding. So that always leads, doesn't it always lead to, lack of productivity? I mean, it starts to go down and down and down. If you don't address those problems, a manager will be perpetrating negative behaviors that will can lead to decreased productivity all the time and performance.
Yeah, you're essentially proving them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Completely. And then after that, you'll have something of engagement issues and motivation. And they'll say, what's wrong with Harry? He's not doing so well anymore. Well, because you didn't have that conversation.
Yeah.
It's really to be disingenuous. You lose motivation. The overall performance of your team also suffers because of those peeps or people, depends on how you want to speak, of employee engagement. And then obviously when they start to be Debbie Downer, so to speak, it increases your turnover. Mm-hmm. It's going to happen. With turnover, we all have turnover, sometimes good turnover, sometimes not good turnover. We're talking about bad turnover here. And it's really not addressing utilization, maybe to somebody that's in your marketplace. It's increased turnover, where employees feel like their concerns are not being addressed. You know how that works. Yeah. They're not having conversations anymore. To leave the organization to a competitor, that's never a good thing. If they're really good, if they're bad, that's fine. But if they're good, it's not good. And it's also the recruitment and training process is very expensive. As you well know, when you got to recruit somebody, you got to go train somebody, and you have expenditure of somebody where you could just have that simple thing, Vaughn, have the conversation, be prepared, right? Yeah. Do it right away. Now, really becoming a courageous leader, it's really about, how do I say this best thing? It's get out of your comfort zone. Yeah. You got to be brave in that aspect, make the decision. I think if you're afraid to make mistakes or lose, you're not going to win on that. You're going to have you really have to grow as a leader with that aspect. You have to grow, be courageous on that aspect, get uncomfortable, have those conversations, because it will pay dividends for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So true, man. I could not agree more with you, Eric. And there's a stat that I often share with folks that are listening to the show, and it's been the stat for a long time, and it ain't changing. In fact, in the past couple of years, it's getting worse. And that you mentioned engagement several times there. 70%, according to Gallup, and their I think the last one I saw was 2021 survey of, I don't know, 3 million employees, some huge number of employees, but 70% of those employees are not happy with their job and would leave their job tomorrow if a better offer came along. So you've got in the broad spectrum of employees, 7 out of 10 are not very happy with their job. And the ones that leave When asked by Gallup, they all cite that the reason why I left because of poor leadership. And when they start asking them to define what poor leadership is to them, they share exactly what you just said. You know, they weren't dealing with the tough stuff. They were letting people get away with things. I worked hard, didn't get rewarded for it. That other person got away with being lazy or whatever. I mean, it's this fairness and lack of standards and correcting bad behavior. So you said that really well, but that is the root of turnover. And once they get hired, now I can also say that I've said this many times, turnover really starts with hiring. You hire the wrong person, you're going to have turnover. Hire the wrong person, hang on to them, you're going to have turnover because other people will leave because you hired the wrong person. But that's a whole nother show.
Amen.
Thank you, Eric, for that. And I want to get this part in. I want to make another special offer to all you fine listeners of the Business Mechanic Show. And there's a lot of you, and I really appreciate that. So if you're interested in becoming a more courageous leader, let's start with you understanding your natural leadership, behavioral, communication style. And because you are listening to this show, I'm going to offer you a free DISC assessment. I charge $125 a copy for these. And that's kind of the going rate for these. It's a big report, typically 40 something pages. And if you're not familiar with a DISC assessment, it's a very broadly used, it's the most broadly used personality assessment tool that measures your behavior and personality traits. And the acronym itself, DISC, D-I-S-C, D-I-S-C, stands for 4 dimensions of behavior: dominance, influence, steadiness or stability, and conscientiousness or compliance. It shows a natural style. You under stress, which we've got to be aware of. How do we respond to stress? DISC brings that out it only takes 15 or 20 minutes. So I think it's really important in order to be a better leader, to grow your leadership style and ability. You got to understand your own behavior patterns, and it'll help you spot the patterns of others who work around you. These insights of your strengths and your weaknesses, your communication style, that's all going to help you be a more effective leader, both in your personal and professional life. So folks, it's free. It's $125 value. I sell hundreds and hundreds of these every year to my employers. But for you fine folks listening to this show, I'm going to give you one for free. So take the 15 or 20 minutes it requires to knock this thing out. Take your assessment. I'm putting a link in the show notes for you to access that link and complete your free assessment. And please take advantage of that. It is going to be super valuable information for you. So let me get back on track here. I wanted to make you all that offer. So let's talk about some courageous leadership traits. Here's what great leaders look like who are courageous. So first, I think a courageous leader is one who is a good listener. Now, listening itself isn't courageous. It's how you respond to what you hear, which is courageous. Controlling yourself, being interested in others, actually checking your ego and self-esteem enough to be able to take information from other people, really listen to it, value that information. And listening is absolutely a skill that can be learned. I had to learn it. I had to take courses for it. We absolutely offer that course. I had to learn it myself because I was really poor at it, because it's so valuable to your effectiveness as a leader. And so you've got to be courageous enough, like Eric said earlier, to own it and make some adjustments, do something about it, be that kind of courageous person. And you don't want to be a listener to the point where I'm just listening long enough to where I can jump in there and tell them they're wrong, which is an extreme example of it. But it's not just about hearing what someone says, but you have to have enough emotional intelligence to also be able to understand the meaning that's behind those words. Think about where that's coming from. And the courageous part comes from listening to people who disagree with you. A courageous leader encourages disagreement, some discourse, because without that, you're going to have a bunch of passive aggressive people around you. And they're just going to be doing it because you're the authority. And that's being a manager. Mm-hmm. So you got to set aside your own point of view. Stop trying to enforce your bias on how you want things done, your perspective on things. And you have to be willing to be wrong sometimes. That's the courageous part. You have to be willing to be wrong because sometimes you are. And you need to swallow your pride, and you need to take other people's input and opinions. And most importantly, grant them the empowerment to use their ideas. Let me tell you, you talk about building relationships and trust and respect, that alone will get her done. So this is so important in developing the business relationships you have with your direct reports, your peers, your boss, when we listen well. That builds trust, builds respect. I know I've said that and trust. Without trust, you got nothing in your personal relationships or your business relationships. You've got to build trust. In order to build trust, you're going to have to be courageous because it's going to take some changes to you, most likely.
I think the key thing there, really, the best way for leaders to really practice that, again, you've taken courses on it. Obviously, you've been around, you've done a lot of things, and you're still working on that aspect. That's how important listening is. And I think the way, I'm not going to say I dumb this down here, but it's really dumbed down for myself. And it's really taking time every day when I'm in a moment, either with my kids or my friends or with you. I have moments of, I think I know what's going to happen, and I will speak before I am, you remember, listening.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, happened this week, didn't it, Vaughn? But
may have.
It happens. Yeah. So the best thing to do is to practice it every single day and have like that moment of zen. So you practice it, listen to the birds, listen to the things. It's actually an acute thing. You can actually, it's a skill you can continue to work on. And it takes a minute. Take a minute, start listening. Just like I just did right there. It's really, really important. And it'll allow you to understand what they're coming for, what they're saying. And it allows you to not just say yes, no, and move on, which is really easy to do in conversations, as we all know, because we're busy. We're busy people. I mean, that's the way it is. Things are happening. So I think the really key thing, be thoughtful with the response, okay? Understand what they're saying. And no matter what the topic is, it's theirs too. You guys are having a dialogue, not a monologue, right?
Well said. Yeah.
So I think there's a key thing for courageous leader is really demonstrating, as we always say, and these are big words, but integrity, honesty, and transparency. You know, those pieces are critical to building any kind of trust that we have in your team, as you mentioned earlier. And honestly, it's the best policy, really. Be honest with what's going on, you know, be honest with your mistakes. That's what, you know, folks, they want real people, authentic people to work with and be a leader. They're looking for authenticity in their leader. So I think that's kind of my quick little points for you on that.
Yeah. And I well said again, but the other part about listening, I just want to make this point.
Yep.
I think again, if you're in an interaction with somebody that is telling you something and all is in your mind is that they're wrong, I'm going to tell them they're wrong, they're an idiot, no, they're wrong, they haven't read the policy, they're wrong. You can't listen. It's impossible to listen with your little monkey brain going on there. You can't, nothing's going to penetrate any of that. So people say to me now in this business where I coach a lot of people, and they'll say to me, gosh, Vaughn, you got so much patience. And I got to tell you, no, I don't. I'm about the least patient person on the planet. But what I know I have to do is I've got to be quiet, both physically and mentally, in order to understand what somebody's saying so I can truly listen. And it's a learned skill. And again, like I said, I took classes, I've practiced this for decades now. You've got to be good at that in order to be an effective leader. You've got to be able to hear, because if all you're doing is thinking about what you're going to say while somebody's speaking to you, you ain't picking up what they're putting down. So, and Eric, you mentioned that transparency thing, and man, so many people struggle with this, and especially when it comes to their expectations. Yeah, I was holding a class on Thursday with a group of managers, and I forget exactly what we were talking. We were doing a strategic plan, but somewhere along the way, we were talking about SMART goals. That's what it was, and that specific, measurable, achievable, the person responsible, time bound. And I always emphasize that time bound part. And that is the part that so many leaders don't necessarily, but managers do. They miss that time bound part. And it's a saying I use often. We are constantly getting mad at people for not doing what we didn't tell them to do. Right?
Yes, exactly.
Both at home and at work, right? Because, can you get this done for me today? Yeah, I can get this done for you today. And at 3:00, you go out there and it should be done. And you say, hey, did you get it done? No, I was going to get it done, before I went home. And now you're mad because they didn't have it done. They've had all damn day to get this done. They haven't got it done. And now you're frustrated with them, but you didn't tell them to get it done by 3:00. That's the time bound part of it. Yeah. And so often we are the victims of our lack of transparency in what we expect out of somebody. Not only the time bound part, but very clearly defining what good looks like. And it takes longer. And if I've heard one manager say this, I've heard 1,000 say it, is, well, they should be able to just figure it out. Well, folks, they can't.
Nope.
They can't. They cannot see what's in your mind. You've got to unpack your expectations, turn that into words in a clearly understandable way, seek input and make sure they're understanding. In fact, again, I had this to demonstrate this yesterday. I've got a president of a company. We were having a group meeting with his management team. And I'm trying to teach this president, in order to be less frustrated at the end of a meeting, make sure you're checking, okay, what did we just agree to? What did we just agree to? And to demonstrate to him, I facilitated this last part of the meeting, and we'd agreed to come, they're building a new filing system in their server, and they're collaborating together, thank God, working together to create this filing system. And they were determining what files were the main files, what were the secondary files, et cetera. Boring stuff. But we agreed at the end that by the time they got back together the next Friday, that everybody would have a list of Post-it notes for what went in the main folders. So you're going to write down all your ideas and opinions on Post-it notes as to what should go in what folder. And to demonstrate that you've got to make sure everybody understands you are being transparent with your expectations. First person I turned to, I won't use their name, but first person I turned to and said, okay, what are we coming back with next week? And he absolutely did not repeat to me what I'd said 3 times. He said, well, we're going to come up with some ideas to go into these folders. I said, nope, that's not what we agreed to. What we agreed to is you're going to write down on Post-it notes, and I think this is the 6th time I'd said it to this group, by folder, what goes into it. This is such simple stuff, right? And this is what frustrates so many people, especially the president of this company. And so I said, okay, and most people just blow on past there. But I went back to the well again. I said, same person, what did we just agree to? Well, I'm going to write down the folder name on a piece of paper, And what goes in it? I said, nope, you didn't get it right again. You're going to write on Post-it notes. Oh, that's right, Post-it notes. Because I guarantee you, when this person came back next week, he's going to have a list. The boss there is going to expect Post-it notes. He's going to throw up his hands in frustration again because he didn't go to the work to make sure his expectations were transparent. And it's that demonstration of frustration that is created by you shows your lack of transparency in leadership. Did I just get on a rant, Eric? I think
I loved it. It's so true. Yes, I did. I've been in many of those meetings.
God.
Maybe not Post-it notes, but
Post-it notes, right? And at the same time, this, I'm going to stick with this same group because this high D leader of this company is so free with his frustrations. He does not mind being a little elevated in his emotions about his frustrations. And so what he has done is he keeps people cramped up and turtled up with their thoughts, ideas. And so he has created a very unsafe environment to share your thoughts, your opinions, your inputs. And so a courageous leader has to be brave enough to shut up and listen. And by doing so, they're in turn creating a safe environment, to create an environment where people are comfortable being themselves, sharing their true thoughts, themselves being courageous enough in a safe enough environment to share the thoughts, ideas, and opinions. And Eric, you and I could do an entire hour of a podcast on shutting up and listening and all the damn great ideas we've gotten through the years. I've got one that I tell all the time, but I'm not going to tell it today, but it was a $400 million idea from a part-time person because I shut up and listened. So it's not easy. It wasn't easy for me. Again, I had to learn it. And I had to learn by being a good listener. I was also creating a safe environment, which is absolutely essential to building a high performance team. And because when they feel safe, they feel supported. And the more likely they are to share their ideas and opinions and to tell you what they're truly thinking. They don't go to their natural passive aggressive tendencies to hold things back. And they'll also hide their mistakes.
Yep.
Well, why didn't you tell me, right? How many times we've heard about, well, they didn't tell me about it. I had to find out by surprise. Why didn't they just come tell me? Because they didn't come tell you because you haven't created a safe environment where they can come and admit those mistakes. And they may know that everyone else, you cream them, to Eric's word, you stomp on them just because they made a mistake. But, being able to admit to your mistakes, owning your mistakes, especially in front of your people, man, does that help you grow as a leader, not only in your confidence as a leader yourself, but in the eyes of everybody around you. And I'm going to tell another quick story here as an example of that. It comes from Simon Sinek's book, Leaders Eat Last. So it's a book. If you haven't read it, I'm encouraging everybody to read it who wants to become a better leader. But it's a book about leadership and the power of organizational culture that builds certain high levels of engagement. But the story I want to share with you is about a Marine who fell asleep on duty. And Simon tells this to illustrate the importance of creating a culture in which people feel valued and supported. And as the story went, this young Marine fell asleep on guard duty, which is a no-no, of course, and his commanding officer found him, caught him asleep. And that commanding officer could have punished him, could have thrown him out of the Marines if the colonel had wanted to, could have punished him in some way for this mistake. But instead, he chose to listen and to understand the circumstances that led to this Marine falling asleep. And instead of having his bias and going right to punishment and stomping on them, he discovered that this young Marine had been working long hours. He'd not had a day off in weeks. He was totally exhausted. So once he learned this, instead of punishing this Marine, the commanding officer took all that in and realized that maybe the reason why this guy fell asleep was my fault. Because I'm in charge here. I'm the one that has allowed this Marine to work all these long hours, no days off. That comes from me. I own that. That's not the Marine's fault. So I have partial responsibility in this. That's courageousness. And so from all that, this commanding officer is a colonel, understanding his role in all this, in this situation, he made some changes. He put in place policies and expectations to ensure that his Marines that were under his command, under his responsibility, were being properly supported and had the resources they needed to do their job. He took steps to foster a culture in which people felt valued and supported. And he made some changes into expectations, which drove morale up. It improved performance, but also it improved the level of respect that his soldiers had in him. That's really important. The other thing too, let's go back to this Marine colonel for a second. If he had committed to his team that he was going to make certain changes, he had to make those changes. If he was going to provide something, he had to provide something. And you've got to be you have to be courageous, and you also have to be very impeccable. I love that word, impeccable with your word. You've got to be honest. You've got to be transparent again. We all have things to hide. We all have things we want to avoid. But it's important to be honest, not only with ourselves, but with those who work with us. And for example, if you don't know something, say it. It's okay not to know everything. Nobody expects you to know everything. It's simple to say, you know what, I don't know. Let's go find out. You're going to be respected so much more for admitting that you don't know something, or even more importantly, in the sticking to your word. If you find that you can't stick to your word, go tell them. Tell them, I found out I can't do it because of, don't just not do it. You've got to be transparent. And it's so much better if you go, I know I said I was going to do this, but I found out I can't. I can't do it because of this and this. And so you just can't break your word. Don't make promises you can't keep. Those goes hand in hand with leadership 101. Don't make promises or commitments that you can't keep. And let's just talk about promises for a minute. I'm going to tell you one of my favorite stories, right? I'm not going to tell you the whole story because we're running a little long, but I had a store that was built on a hellhole. And it happened to be over in Las Vegas. And everything that could go wrong was constantly going wrong in this location. And I changed managers, and I put an ineffective leader back in there again, and the same hell continued to take place. And finally, I went out, I persuaded I had a regional manager in training. And I said, it is Mike. And I said, Mike, God, you got to go fix this for me. I'm looking like an idiot. I'm letting these people down in this store by continually putting ineffective leadership in there. I know you can do it. Mike, please go to Las Vegas for me and get this place cleaned up. And then as part of you being there, one, you're winning huge brownie points with me and the company. But second, we've got to start developing your replacement that has the same leadership qualities that you do. So this place had a very low level of engagement. We measured this every year. And Mike, being the leader that he was, came in and started having group meetings with different groups of employees. And he wanted to know everything that was bothering them. In order to fix it, I had to know what was wrong. And Mike was courageous enough to put himself into the position to have his face eaten off by these disgruntled employees, because if he didn't get their opinions out on the table, he would never know what those opinions were, and much less be able to fix them. So one of the groups he was working with, Mike had a group of the mechanics, the technicians. And this is always a hard group. Anybody in the auto industry that has technicians working for them, no, it's a tough group. They're very demanding. And so he had the technicians. I think there's like 12 of them in this location. Had them in the break room, having his meeting with them. And he's asking them, what's wrong? What can I fix? And one of them, who was kind of the spokesperson for them, said, okay, Mike, let me ask you a question, kind of in a smart ass way. How many people you see here, Mike? Mike says, well, there's 12 of you. And he says, and Mike, management, and God, I hate it when employees say management requires. That is a bad word to hear, folks. Management requires that we all go to lunch at the same time. And so we all go to lunch at the same time because that's what management requires. And Mike, you just counted 12 technicians here. Look behind me. How many microwaves do you see? Mike looks. He says, one. So Mike, how do you expect us to come in, have 30 minutes for lunch, all at the same time, and 12 of us warm up our lunches and have time to eat it and get back to work? We need some more microwaves, Mike. Mike said, so noted. I'll take care of that. You make a good case. So now this technician's on a roll, and he says, well, Mike, while we're on this, how many employees do we have here? Mike says, I think like 125, something like that. And the technician says, okay, Mike, and most of these people bring their lunch every day. Mike, how many refrigerators do you see behind me? Mike says, one. Mike, how in the world are 125 people, and let's say on any given day, 50 of them are bringing their lunches, get it into one refrigerator? Mike says, it's impossible. I'm going to take care of that for you. So, long story short, Mike broke up the meeting. Mike immediately goes out to the lot, gets a pickup truck, drives down the street to Home Depot, buys 2 refrigerators and 4 microwaves, loads them into the pickup truck, brings them back, unloads them. And so by the time these technicians were leaving that day, Mike had taken care of the problem. Well, let me tell you, that day forward, Mike walked on water. Mike, honest to God, could do no wrong because of that gesture, that step that he took, because he listened, he took care of it, and he took care of it immediately. And you think about it, he might have spent, I don't know, this was probably close to 20 years ago. So let's say he spent $1,000 on a couple refrigerators, maybe 1,200. And, a microwave's $100, so he spent $400. So under $2,000, which ain't nothing, right? But for under $2,000, he saved us hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And you talked about this earlier, Eric, and turnover costs, training, all lost business, all these things for that one grand gesture of a $2,000 investment because he listened transparently to his employees. I love that story.
Yeah.
And thanks for those who are hearing it for multiple times. It's just such a great display. So I'm going to shut up. I'm going to go.
I mean, that is a courageous leadership right there.
It's courageous leadership. He took his, right?
I'm really glad that you mentioned that because usually stories in Vegas stay in Vegas. It's usually what happens. But I appreciate
those aren't good stories always.
That's a good story there, Vaughn.
So let me shut up for a minute and turn it back over to you, Eric. What are some other traits of courageous leadership in your mind?
Well, I think it's to piggyback on the story really is respecting people's point of view. If this guy in Vegas never listened to this or respected his point of view, he would not have kept that team. I mean, it's very simple. Even if they disagree with you, he made something that could have been really explosive. And he made it into the biggest win probably in that section where you didn't have to go out and worry about that location again. Nope. Right? I mean, not even close.
In fact, let me just tell you how that location performed. During the 2008 recession, when our business as a company was down 30, 40%, that store was having increases.
That's incredible.
It's incredible. That's what a turnaround Mike made in that store. So
Mhm.
I'm sorry I interrupted.
No, I think that just goes to the point. I'll make it brief. Really, is it's a value, such a valuable contribution that he made, and he had that. Obviously, his boss, which was you, allowed him the autonomy, correct, to go ahead and make those decisions and make those pieces to actually grow that business and keep those people. So really, respecting someone else's opinion is utmost. Understand that you listen, what's going on, keep an open dialogue, like we said before, right? Super important. It really creates productive. That story really just stands in my brain right now. You just told me, and I can't stop thinking about it. I wish I was there to see it, because those kind of moments are really things that you'll remember forever, like you just mentioned. But to have a balance of managers and subordinates, and then you build that trust, that's really what he did, right?
Yep.
He built the trust within the organization in that location. I can go through an example. I don't know if it's any better than the example that you just had, but you talk about the retail chain. There's the guy whose name is Tim Johnson, right? And he's a mid-level manager in a retail chain. He really had a lot of courage to propose a new sales strategy, and he went against the total industry standard of norms. Despite facing all those type of things, I'll keep it brief here. Resistance from managers saying, "Oh, we don't always do it that way." Tim said, "No, something, I see a great idea here. I'm going to present the data and the research that I did, support my proposal that was going to happen." And ultimately, guess what, Vaughn? He convinced them. And you know what happened when they convinced somebody like that? The innovative approach, sales went significantly up,
Good
and it
stuff
grew.
happened.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's a small little, there's so many of those little stories if you just listen. So, making the tough decisions sometimes that you need to be made, even if it's not the popular one. If you, as a leader, courageous leader, understand all the information, right? Whatever is coming from your subordinates to your boss to, a peer of yours, I think those are important. But, as long as you make the right decision, and you have to make sure that you're courageous in making that decision, is super important. Never go out of things of fear, Vaughn, ever, as you know. Making decisions of fear, because somebody's going to leave or not going to listen to you anymore. It's really just you're going to end up regretting it later down the road. It happens. You know exactly what I'm talking about, as it didn't plan out. And if it doesn't work, your plan is you make a courageous decision and you say, "This is what we're going to do," and it doesn't work, you know what you need to do? Be brave. Take responsibility, really, and say, "I own this. It didn't work. Let's try another solution. Let's try another direction." It's okay. Again, you're vulnerable. Vulnerability is extraordinarily important as a courageous leader.
Yep.
So that's really the kind of the ideas that I had based upon this discussion. And another side little thing, just another story. It's kind of a personal story about listening to, I know time's running thin, listening to others, right? Even depends on the age. Let's just say, for instance, when I was a kid, my dad came to us, as he was a Vans owner, him and his brother, and he came to us looking for a new idea. We had the regular skate shoe, but not the skateboard shoe. And he was looking for a moniker. And we went around our kids, my brothers, my older brothers, and me, and I said, "What kind of ideas do you have?" He said, "Hey, how about, far out, make it a name as far out, and bitchin." We had those things of bitchin. And my brother came up with the idea off the wall. And my brother Mark is the person that actually came up with that, incongruent with other people, because it was kind of a cool thing. It was like, that's crazy. That's what that meant back in the day. Off the wall meant crazy, right? And so he actually went out and drew the actual skateboard that's still used to this day. And I think he was age 13.
Wow.
I mean, he's an artist, mind you, but I mean, today he still is, but he drew that whole piece. And that's what that one little story going to your family and having those stories going to those people of point of view that maybe is not a regular decision maker in a company. They have ideas. There's ideas out there like that. So I just wanted to add that little snippet.
Well, but I want to unpack that a little bit more because God, I love that story. You think about your dad,
Yep.
who is a icon. He's a legend in the skateboard industry, a
Yep.
legend. He was humble enough to go to his damn kids
Yeah,
and ask for ideas and came up with one that good.
that's true.
It's amazing. Love that story. Thanks for sharing that one. I'd never heard
Sure.
that one from you.
Yeah.
And then I want to just one more time,
Yep.
back up just a little bit. You talked about fear.
Yeah.
And that fear that many managers have that great leaders do not possess. They're able to overcome that fear. One of the most common fears is firing somebody.
Yes.
Right, Eric?
Yes.
Because they fear, well, I'm not going to have anybody do the job. Or they fear that the next person I hire could be just as bad. Or they fear that this person's going to go off on them some way. That somehow it's going to harm the business if I fire somebody. And Eric, I know you fired your fair share of people. I certainly have fired mine. It's not a pleasant thing.
No, not fun.
Not fun.
No.
Did I think about somebody going off on me? Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah.
Did I sometimes think about, well, who's going to do the job if that person's not here? Yeah, I had to think about that. I had to have a plan for that.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll ask you the same thing. How many times did you fire somebody, Eric, and something bad happened in that discussion?
Not often.
Yeah, maybe
I can barely
once,
remember one.
once,
Yeah.
right? And it was from the least expected one ever. The ones I always expected to be a little rough never were.
Right.
Right. Now, you and I were both trained to lay the groundwork, to be transparent with our thoughts and feedback on somebody. So when it came, it was not a surprise. It's the surprise firings that can go bad, right, Eric?
Right. Exactly.
But again, this may do some harm to my business. Did the sun come up the next day after you fired that person?
And by the way, it was bright. It was beautiful.
It was much brighter. And
it was.
And these people we held off firing, Eric, you and I can both relate to this.
Yes.
Once they're gone, what starts happening? All the skeletons start coming out of the closet, right? Oh, did you know he was doing that? She was doing this. She was saying that. And it's like, why didn't you tell me?
They don't.
And when they say that to you, that's a sign, folks, that you have not created a transparent, safe environment for people to come to you. That's how Eric and I learned, right?
Yes.
Yes.
So
anyway, we got to start wrapping this thing up.
Yeah.
It's as a manager, it is so easy to get caught up in the day-to-day. But Eric alluded to it earlier. We got to remember our actions, our decisions, they impact everybody around us. Our people are watching us. It's like a documentary camera following you everywhere you go. They're watching and measuring everything you do. They're judging you. You're being judged all day, every day.
Amen. It is.
Right? And so keep that in mind. That may be the prompt, the catalyst for you thinking more about your leadership style, what you're doing, what you're saying, following up, being transparent, being bold. And so understand we're all leaders in one way or another. And, sometimes we're leaders at home with our family. Sometimes we're leaders at work. Sometimes we're leaders with our coworkers, our church members, whatever it is. It's important. It's essentially important for us to remember, if I want to be a leader, I have to set an example of being courageous. If I'm courageous, others are going to follow me. Others are going to want to do work for me. If you guys want more information on becoming a courageous leader, a results-driven leader, visit our website, rdltraining.com. That's RomeoDeltaLima.com. RomeoDeltaLima training.com for more information. You can start your leadership development program for only $47 per month. So, Eric, thanks for joining me on your first podcast. Man, I enjoyed having you on. I can't wait for you to be on every one going forward. This was so much more fun for me. So appreciate you coming.
The thrill is mine. I to be with such an iconic speaker and person that knows their stuff. You like that?
Oh man, I'm going to make sure we get that in the recording.
Take that off. Just kidding.
Thank you for your kind words,
you.
Mr. Van Doren. So thanks everybody for listening, and we will talk to you all again real darn soon.